Почитувани, добар ден и добре дојдовте во ново издание на ова интервју. Наш денешен гостин евроамбасадорот Дейвид Гир. Господине амбасадоре, добро ми дојдовте.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the program, Vesna.
Thank you. Господине амбасадоре, го започнавме длабинскиот скрининг процес во државата. Дали ова значи дека ние всушност започнавме и сме во фаза на почеток на преговорите со Европската Унија? Оти нели така не убедуваа нашите официјални лица при посетата на работната група на Советот на Европската Унија, кои што ја посетија нашава земја?
Well, you're right. The negotiations started in July and we immediately moved in September to the first step, which is the screening. Let's just unpack what screening is to start with. There are two stages in the screening. First of all, the European Commission goes through with counterparts from the administration here, explaining the latest developments on the EU side in terms of standards and laws, covering an enormous area of activity, what we call the acquis of the European Union. So that runs from agriculture to trade, customs to statistics, environment to rule of law. That's the first stage where it's explaining the latest developments. The second phase of the screening concerns the part where this country comes in and looks at those standards and practices and sees where the country stands, where are the gaps, what needs to be done in order to become up to the standard of the European Union and in order to become a member. So what we're seeing at the moment is very intensive activity in Brussels with big teams from the administration here, working with the European Commission, developing a momentum, and this is all good news. And you're quite right, you mentioned the Council Working Group that visited North Macedonia and Albania very recently. That working group is tasked with working with negotiating countries. It doesn't work with countries which haven't opened negotiations. So yet another signal that we're on the way, we're moving forward, and the screening process is moving forward. We would expect the whole screening process probably to last about 14 months.
Европската Унија најверојатно ќе ни испорача своји барања, да речеме, спроведување или подготвување на нови закони, за да се подобриме. Вие сте овде речиси неколку години и ја скенирате состојбата, така речено, во земјата. Подготвени ли сме ние за она што се нарекува практичен дел во спроведувањето на законите? Оти се чини дека сме многу флексибилни во изготвувањето на законите, ама како тешко да ги спроведуваме. Кои се искуствата ваши?
The whole accession process is very challenging. It's a tremendous task because it's not just negotiations, which is obviously a very important element, but those negotiations go hand in hand with the reforms that are necessary to bring the country up to a standard that it can join the European Union. It's a transformation of the country, and it covers whole swathes of activity. It's about ensuring that there is a justice system that people can trust in, about improving living standards, about ensuring that people have the right skills to be able to compete in the job market, to encourage foreign investment in the country as well. So you see, it's a huge task, it's a huge reform task. You're absolutely right. Obviously, it's important to have in place the right laws, but they are useless if they're not implemented and enforced. And for that, you also need to have the institutions in place, which are professional, based on a meritocracy, rather than, let's say, party interests or other interests. So this exercise is very challenging. What it needs is a single-minded determination from the government to move forward on reform, but it also needs cooperation across the political divide between government and the opposition to agree that on the reform agenda, on the EU reform agenda, we agree we're going to work together, let's say in Parliament, to move forward. It needs also civil society, business, and ordinary citizens to bring their expertise and also keep pressure to move forward on this road. I'm optimistic that this can be done, but of course this is very much for the country to do. The steps are very much in your hands.
Земјата е исправена пред еден нов предизвик, тука е спорот со Бугарија. Граѓаните, така речено, се поделени околу францускиот предлог и не веруваат дека со него ни ветувате зачувување на јазикот, зачувување на македонскиот идентитет. Треба ли да стравуваме дека ќе останеме сами доколку Бугарија, например, ни испорача нови барања? Дали Европската Унија има механизми, например, со кои би се спречило ново поставување на барања од страна на Бугарија и како тука ќе се постапи?
I think we have to recognize that the discussions, the public debate that took place in June and July was extremely painful. People were frustrated and disappointed. Of course, there were some that were using the issue for their own political aims, but without doubt there were many people who were genuinely concerned and anxious. The road to the European Union is not about losing identity. If you take, let's say, Slovenia or Croatia, countries which have joined relatively recently, they didn't lose their identity on the road to the European Union. Slovenia in particular was concerned that its language somehow might get lost in this great sort of melting pot of languages that is the European Union. That's not at all the case. Both countries are now strong in their identity, proud members of the European Union, and able to bring their identity and language to contribute that to this collective and multiple identities, which is the European Union, and which we summarize in the motto of united in diversity. So I think this country can be confident that its identity and language will be part of the will be part of this process and will be protected.
Sure.
And that as you go along the reform path, what you're effectively doing is you're strengthening the country, you're making it more stable, you're making it more prosperous, more democratic. All of these elements will make for a stronger country. Of course, there's a responsibility on our side to make sure that the country's progress is judged on merit, on the reforms that are put in place and not on other issues. And that's a commitment that was given by the President of the European Commission, President von der Leyen, and also by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, when they visited Skopje in the summer.
Веќе ми го провлековте следното прашање. Дали Европската ова со Словенија и Хрватска, дали Европската Унија веќе минувала во минатото и се соочувала со слични случаи, како овој меѓу Македонија и Бугарија? И дали во секој случај носела нови правила за решавање на спорови? Едноставно, дали постоја универзални принципи? Какви се вашите искуства?
So the treaty which establishes the European Union sets out the criteria for membership of the European Union. We call them for short the Copenhagen criteria. They are standard and they apply to all countries that want to join. Then you dig down a bit further. For each country in the accession process, we develop and agree something called a negotiating framework. This contains the guiding principles on which the accession negotiations will be based. And these again are generally standard with some variations. So for example, for Albania and North Macedonia, the negotiating framework refers to the new methodology, which you will remember was put in place a couple of years ago. It also updates on the latest elements of the rules, of the laws and practices in place in the European Union. Of course, there are also some specificities, specific circumstances in the countries which may be reflected in those negotiating frameworks themselves. So for example, in the case of Croatia, in its accession process, the issue of the delimitation of the border with Slovenia was relevant in the same way that the question of normalization of relations with Kosovo is relevant in the context of Serbia's accession negotiations. So general principles, a general approach, but with some specificities reflecting the country.
Некои повторно тука во овој контекст, некои од западните медиуми во своите објавени анализи, во своите новинарски извештаи проценуваат веќе дека Европската Унија следи неевропски пристап, неевропски начин на однесување, да речеме, кон помалите земји. Има различни аршини за различни земји. Зошто е тоа така?
As I say, the approach is a standard approach based on common principles. We have for relations something called a stabilization and association agreement, a process which ensures that the relations with the different countries follow a similar path. Then for accession we have the Copenhagen criteria, which I mentioned just now, and which are about ensuring that the same criteria apply to everyone. For example, in the area of our assistance, assistance is open to all of the Western Balkans for financial, economic and technical assistance. All of this is a similar approach. I won't say standardized, because of course there are some variations depending on the specific circumstances of the country, and that will depend upon an appreciation, a report or advice given by the European Commission, and ultimately a decision from the EU member states on the basis of unanimity. But the overall approach is a common and shall we say, the same principled approach, even though of course there are some variations because countries and circumstances are different.
Дали Европската унија е унија на вредности, на принципи? Познат е ставот, познато е мислењето на народот во нашата држава дека многу дадовме како држава на тој пат кон Европската унија, а многу малку добивме. Добивме речиси трошки. Народот е револтиран. Дали, едно народско прашање, дали Западот се поигрува со помалите земји, во случајот со нас?
No, as I've said just a little bit earlier, talking about the events in June and July, there was a great deal of anxiety, particularly about the idea of loss of identity. And as I mentioned, you don't lose your identity on the way to the European Union. Indeed, if anything, because the country is becoming more solid, because of the reforms that are put in place, that identity, I think, it can become more confident. This country has, frankly, a confident and rich identity. Today, which is the Day of European Languages, I will be, for the third time, giving something called the Babylon Award. The Babylon Award is an award for translation of works of European literature into Macedonian. More than 140 works have been financed by us and translated into Macedonian. Again, showing respect for the language, your identity. But that's not all. If you look at the country broadly, the European Union has supported the restoration and preservation of archaeological, cultural and other key sites across the country which talk about the rich history and culture of this country. And we've worked very hard and we're very keen to bring in tourists from the European Union into this country so they can see what it has to offer, from Macedonium in Kruševo to Skopje's brutalist architecture or Skopje's bazaar, to Vevčani Carnival or to Struga Poetry Festival. Or last Saturday I was at in Štip at the Pastromiliada, for example. So it has a rich country, a rich culture, and we are very keen to continue supporting Macedonian culture, art, literature, and there'll be much more of this to come in the course of the process of accession.
Овде сте, пак ќе речам, неколку години, живеете, можеби не ги чувствувате на ист начин проблемите со македонскиот народ. Меѓутоа, ме интересира вашето мислење, вашето искуство. Дали и колку сме ние подготвени за влез во Европската унија?
Are you ready to join the European Union tomorrow? Clearly not. But this is the whole point about the accession process. The accession process is about the process of transforming, changing the country, building the country so it can join the European Union not as a junior partner, but as an equal and full member. So it can participate, let's say, in the internal market, which is 450 million people, as an equal partner. Its economy is sufficiently resilient. It's people able to be part of that freedom of movement, etc. So it's about ensuring that the country is able to be at the table at the same level as the other member states. How is the pulse? I mean, there is reform, you can feel it. There is a desire to go much further, to see much more happening, and I think what we need to do is really focus on that and, as I say, be quite optimistic, but we need to really focus on ensuring that we achieve that that transformation is achieved as soon as possible.
Дали е вистински момент за државата, за состојбата во која што се наоѓаме, барањето на опозицијата, да речеме, за предвремени избори и за референдум, иако вие имавте една изјава во врска со референдумот на опозицијата?
The question of a possible referendum or the constitutional change is a sovereign decision for the country. It's for the country to decide on that. All I would say is this, that if, as I've been saying, basically that the process of accession is a process of transformation, it needs to be a national project with all the focus on that to get there. If that is the goal, then that's where the focus should be rather than on other issues.
Ќе цитирам еден ваш колега, кој што неодамна имаше една изјава и ја пренесува и регионалните медиуми, ја пренесовме и ние, медиумите во светот. Вели вака: Европската унија потроши многу време на Западен Балкан, не треба да бега надвор од надпревар меѓу Русија и Кина. И вели мора да ја оживее перспективата за членство. Ова го кажа Рот. Според него, таму каде што Европската унија действува предосна, Путин се нуди себе си како спасител.
Let's dig down and look at Russia a bit. So, as you know, on the 24th of February, Russia invaded an independent and sovereign country, Ukraine, on the basis of an ideology which said the country didn't exist and Ukrainian identity didn't exist. Since then, we have seen Russia bombard cities, hitting residential blocks, schools, hospitals. We've seen some atrocities, like in Bucha. We have seen the threat of use of nuclear weapons. We've seen nuclear sites put at risk. We've also seen now, in the light of the advances by Ukraine, we've seen a mobilization. We've seen also an energy crisis resulting from this, as well as a food crisis. The mobilization, we see many Russians already having left the country, many thousands trying to leave. What kind of savior is this? What kind of salvation comes through such a situation? This country has shown clear and moral leadership on the issue of Ukraine, providing support for the Ukrainian people. So what I would say to many of your viewers who follow the news and may see it in different media, including on social networks, be very careful. I mean, look very carefully. There's an enormous amount of disinformation out there. Check the sources. Look at multiple stories. Don't let yourself be seduced by the stories whereby the victim becomes the aggressor or crimes become whitewashed. It's a very concerning situation, and it's important to be able to see the news clearly and see what is happening in the country. And on the Western Balkans, I mean, our approach to the Western Balkans has been consistent. What are we offering? We're offering membership of the European Union on an equal level. We're offering a process of transformation of the country in ways which the overwhelming, I think, sense of the population would be favorable, because they want similar things. They want jobs. They want a system of justice that works. They don't want to see corruption. They want to be able to travel. They want to have the skills. All of the things that, you know, I want in the European Union and people want here as well. So that's what's on offer, and we're providing very substantial assistance to these countries. We're also the biggest trading partner and the biggest source of foreign direct investment, by far dwarfing any other partner.
За крај не можам да не прашам каква е состојбата со Европската унија, каква е состојбата во Европа околу она што сега се случува и она што сега е шпиц прашање. Тоа е енергетската криза. Дали и како Европската унија има механизми да се справи и дали ќе се справи со енергетската криза?
Well, we face a very big challenge, all of us, in the European Union, but also here in this country and in other countries in the region, of how to address this energy crisis. From our side, it's very clear, I think also clear here, that the source the main reason for the energy crisis is Russia's war on Ukraine. So the first thing that we have been doing is reducing our dependence upon Russian hydrocarbons, recognizing that it is not a reliable source of energy. So we've seen a drop of gas from 40% to 9%, and we're working on reducing that to zero by 2027. In addition, the European Union is developing a number of steps which are designed to help address the energy crisis. This includes reducing the consumption of electricity and gas. You see it in many different countries. Increasing storage for the winter ahead, which is important, gas storage in particular. We've also been putting a cap on the revenues from what we call inframarginals who produce electricity. Inframarginals are those producers of electricity whose cost price is below that of gas, mainly renewables. So a cap on the revenues there. And we've also putting in place a crisis contribution from fossil fuel companies to national budgets in this context. In addition, we've established a joint energy platform which is designed to help look for common purchases of gas, etc. And North Macedonia is part of that joint energy platform and is contributing very actively to it. So we very much have a similar problem and we need to work together to resolve it. In the longer term, of course, the European Union is already providing very substantial support in areas such as energy efficiency, renewables, but also in transition fuels like gas through interconnectors with Greece, Kosovo, and with Serbia. But the point, I think, in this one is we need to address these issues together.
Заедно се надевам ќе се избориме во сето ова што следи и зимава и наредните години кои што ни следуваат, да останеме оптимисти, да веруваме дека сме на вистинскиот пат кон Европската Унија и дека наскоро, како што ни убедуваат, ќе станеме нејзина членка. Најпрво да се спасиме од енергетската криза и да се снабдиме со се она што ни е потребно за да ја преживееме, за да ја поминеме оваа зима. Евроамбасадорот Дейвид Гир, почитувани, беше гостин во ова наше интервју. Ви благодарам за гостувањето, ви благодарам што одвоивте време.
Ви благодарам.
Благодарам, а вам, почитувани, ви посакувам секое добро.